I grew up during the halcyon days of PC gaming, when every shopping mall had a computer software store, bursting at the seams with big box titles. Every department store had shelves dedicated to PC games and those beautiful, glorious bargain bins where all sorts of treasures waited to be rescued. And later, around the mid-90s, it was very common to see magazine ads for male direct sellers, some of whom would take your unwanted CD-ROMs in exchange for different ones. Or pornos, apparently? Towards the end of the millennium, eBay became available, opening a new collecting avenue, as long as you didn't mind everything you received reeking of cigarette smoke. I enjoyed all genres, but my absolute favorite was the point-and-click adventure, and they came in all varieties. There were mysteries, puzzlers, full-motion video, fantasy, historically set, creepy games, comedies, games for Apple that I had to play at a friend's house, 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional, first person. There were action hybrids, strategy hybrids, role-playing hybrids, games based on popular intellectual properties, games featuring prominent-ish film and TV actors. Some had terrible box art. They ranged in scale from grand spectacle to simple shareware. Some were made for kids, and some were made for grown-ups. But in the second half of the 90s, the traditional point-and-click adventure game began to quickly die out, and by the turn of the millennium, the large majority of adventure titles could be lumped into one of two categories: clunky 3D or look-alike Myst clone. No, hang on, I'm not done yet. And okay, there. Tragically, the light of adventure gaming had gone out. Or had it? You see, in 1997, a programmer named Chris Jones, no, not Tex Murphy Chris Jones, he's awesome too, Onion Ring Chris Jones, designed a software toolkit based on Sierra's SCI engine called Adventure Creator, which was then soon rebranded as Adventure Game Studio, AGS. This program gave anyone with enough ambition to create their own adventure games. In 2001, programmer Ludwig Strigius developed Scum VM, a software toolset allowing designers to make their own LucasArts-style adventures. Independent hobby developers took a look at the adventure game catalog from the late 90s and were like,
"Look how they massacred my boy."
And got to work. By the early 2000s, homebrew titles began popping up and small but passionate communities began to form. My earliest encounter with these early pioneers came when I stumbled upon Reality on the Norm, a shared universe created by Ben Croshaw. While his creation kind of melted into this barely comprehensible puddle of Microsoft Paint goofiness as significantly less talented contributors piled onto it, there were exceptions, most notable of which being 3 contributions by a fellow named Dave Gilbert, who later helped to spearhead the revival of the commercial point-and-click adventure with his company Wadjet Eye Games in 2006. 2001 saw the formation of the non-profit company Tierra, get it, who later rebranded as Anonymous Game Developers Interactive, AGDI, with the goal of remaking older Sierra adventures and releasing them for free. Infamous Adventures was founded in 2004 with a similar purpose. These individuals and companies, along with others far too numerous to mention here, pulled my beloved game genre from the brink and reforged it into a new silver age of adventure gaming. If you saw my last video, I ranked the commercially released King's Quest titles developed by Sierra Online. In this video, I will rank all of the indie homebrew titles that I am aware of. None of these games are considered canonical to the original storyline, but several have been embraced by the original game's writer and designer Roberta Williams. Let's Kill Cedric is a one-screen gag game predicated on the meme that everyone hates Cedric and wants him dead. It sort of plays like Duck Hunt if Duck Hunt was clumsily programmed nonsense with the worst hit detection ever designed. You'll spend more time installing it than you will enjoying it. Next. Hey look, it's Cedric again in Owl's Quest, which involves him attempting to navigate horrifying spelling and grammar atrocities within a Microsoft Paint environment in order to make it to Prince Alexander and Princess Rosella's birthday celebration following the events of King's Quest VIII. You solve a half-dozen puzzles, and it's all over in a few minutes. This is one of those games where I don't know how to approach it because I don't know if the designer was a little kid or if English was his primary language, so I don't want to say it sucks or anything, but forget it, it sucks. On a brighter note, spoiler alert! The ending does act as a prelude to the Silver Lining, which is a nice touch.
Bippity, boppity, boo.
So we're starting off with this really nice animation. It's actually really well done. Very pleased with it so far. Got Graham and Valanice sharing a tender moment. I really like this animation. Wait, what? What? No! How? Why? Oh my goodness! I will never unsee this! No! No! King's Quest 2 1/4 is, interesting. It opens with Queen Valanice realizing that Prince Alexander has been kidnapped and is being bottle-fed formula. Strangely, it feels like she's much more concerned about the formula than the actual kidnapping, which sets a weird tone very early. Anyway, you gather your, breast pump and set off to find your kidnapped and malnourished son alone because King Graham is, I don't know, busy, I guess? You haul your massive milk-laden memories across multiple screens ripped from both King's Quest 1 and the worst pixel-perfect navigation screens of King's Quest 3 on a mercifully brief rescue adventure. The biggest issue with the game is that it is clearly intended as a humorous adult-themed romp, but there's so little dialogue or even descriptive text in the game that the whole thing really falls flat. A game like this needs jokes, puns, and a wry atmosphere to work, and none of those things are present here to any meaningful degree. However, I did discover a little Easter egg where you can perform your monthly self-examination. So there's that, I guess. Just a quick disclaimer here, although we're only moving ahead by one numerical spot, the jump in quality is massive. In order to illustrate my point, I asked my 9-year-old to construct a detailed diagram. As you can see, here's the 3 bottom titles, and way up here are the rest. So this is a cool little retelling of King's Quest V in a purely text format, reminiscent of the early Zork titles and 100 others. It is played in a browser window and is very basic with its commands and descriptions. It's fun to mess around with for a bit, but frankly I don't see the purpose of it besides saying, hey, it's King's Quest V in text format, isn't that cute? I was also unable to save my game online, which made it impossible for me to complete it, but I think I got the idea. Alright, so let's address the elephant in the room here. King's Quest, the 2015 episodic reimagining by the Odd Gentleman, is included here rather than my original list, despite being published by Sierra. At the time, the rights to Sierra's catalog belonged to Activision, who revived the defunct Sierra brand to help move units through name recognition. Therefore, I don't personally regard it as an official, canonical release. But that's just me. You see, since Activision owned the rights, then this series could very justifiably be considered an official release. So a person is well within their rights to tell me I'm wrong. But whatever. If you believe that, then you can make your own stinking list. The series starts off with tremendous potential, introducing you to a world full of wonder and whimsy. It looks great, sounds great, and seems so full of promise. I mean, look at this voice acting cast. We have Christopher Lloyd, Wallace Shawn,
Inconceivable!
Michael Leon Woolley,
You know what this needs? A sharp stick. Be right back.
Kath Soucie,
And there's more where that come from, big boy.
and even Tom Kenny, amongst many others. Episode 1, which was released for free, is quite good and left me excited for more. Just a warning to everyone who only played the first episode, which includes many of the positive reviews on Steam, by the way. I'm gonna drop some spoilers here because there's simply too much to unpack without them. Episode 2 is where things get dark. King Graham, along with the residents of the local village, are kidnapped by goblins, and Graham must spend the duration of the episode keeping everyone from starving to death while trying to find a way out. Well, joke's on you, buddy, because one character isn't gonna make it out alive, and you have to choose who it is. Fun! This kind of storytelling works great for certain genres, but it's a really bad fit here. Episode 3 reworks the story from King's Quest II, wherein Graham sees a vision of his future wife in his magic mirror and sets off to rescue her. The outdated fantasy trope of the helpless maiden trapped in the tower is retooled by, surprise! Having 2 potential Valanices instead of 1. You must win the favor of one or the other through a series of gameplay choices, dialogue options, and mini-games that frankly makes the process feel even grosser than the original. Will it be the introverted Brainiac V, or the spunky goofball Niece? Let's play a boring card game to find out. Episode 4 is the worst of the series, with literally 80% of the playtime mired in block sliding or flipping puzzles, while Graham and Alexander bicker with each other for no good reason besides the plot needing some kind of tension because you're not going to get it from a drawn-out series of mini-games. Episode 5 turns the boat around with a poignant and beautifully acted story about Graham's final hours, complete with the frustrations of a failing body, the fog of cognitive decline, and the regrets of not having one last chance to see the world. It's a dismal story where nearly everyone you met earlier in the series is long dead, and the world seems quiet and empty as a result, with little more than ghosts and memories occupying the landscape. The royal family feels isolated and alone. The whimsical art of episode 1 still exists, but now seems like a hollow facsimile. Graham's failing mind plays tricks on him, and we never know for sure what is real and what are shades of his dementia. Graham, in many ways, has become like his predecessor Edward, feeble, mired in the past, and overseeing a kingdom in decline. But it is also a story of hope. It is a story of fresh beginnings and dreams for the future. It is a story whose ending made me pretend to do this, when in reality, I was really doing this. It is a story of a new generation rising up to replace the old and the potential it brings, thereby bringing the story full circle to its origins.
Long live the king! Long live the king!
If only the entire series was this good, it would be easily top 3 on my list. But as it is, there's just too much wrong with it. Which is a shame because The Odd Gentleman developed one of my favorite games. It is a game that strays too far from its point-and-click roots, owing more to Telltale titles and modern hidden object games than anything Sierra made. There's just too much, way too much of this stuff, and 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 this stuff, for it to work. Don't get me wrong, there's plenty of individual components to like, but those components never come together into a cohesive whole. The entire series feels like it's throwing disparate things at a wall, hoping something sticks. By the time something does stick, the series is over. As a first effort, AGDI's King's Quest I is an admirable one. It's a straight remake of the original, or perhaps more accurately, a remake of the 1990 remake, updating graphics and sound, adding orchestral music and digitized speech, and it takes no risks whatsoever. Where this remake stumbles is with its artwork, often suffering from oddly dark screens and muddy background art. I also thought several of the animations were a step down from the 1990 version, and the voiceovers sometimes sound like they were recorded in a telephone booth.
Thank you, Sir Knight.
But again, for a fledgling group of indie developers completely overhauling a game at a time when this really hadn't been done before, this was a solid attempt. Made by the Homestar Runner guys, this is a very basic browser game based on old 1980s adventure titles. You gotta figure out how to make yourself look like a shabby, smelly, and burning peasant in order to be allowed up the mountain to confront the evil dragon that burninated your hut to the ground. Despite a couple of really obtuse puzzles, it's a short and silly experience, complete with a fun cast of characters and genuinely humorous dialogue. The first known unofficial King's Quest remakes, these were made using the ZZT adventure game system and feature ASCII graphics and simple PC speaker beeps and bloops. These stand apart from the rest due to their RPG and roguelike elements, making them truly unique and fun to play. ZZT2 features a longer and more in-depth quest spread out over several chapters. If you enjoy Kingdoms of Kraz, or, well, Rogue for that matter, then you'll get a kick out of these. Opting for a very straight remake of King's Quest III, indie developers Infamous Adventures managed to update the game graphically while giving it an excellent soundtrack and streamlining the experience as much as possible. Well, maybe not quite as much as possible. My two biggest gripes with the original are addressed in this remake, with spellcasting being a simple matter of having all the ingredients required and clicking cast, while the timer is handled by giving the player oodles of time to prepare the spells. In fact, I had all the spells completed before Manannan returned from his very first trip. I appreciated the first solution, but felt like the second wasn't the best way to handle it. It's tough to place this one because as a faithful remake, it ends up being a polished version of one of the weakest titles in the entire Sierra catalog. A polished turd is still kind of a turd, but in fairness, this is a very solid remake and highly recommended over the original. I mean, check out this church organ cover of Manannan's entrance. Woo! Yeah!
Excellent.
This fan-made remake wisely leaves the graphics and story alone, opting instead to make many small improvements to the base game. Some of these include extra animations, a very welcome autosave feature, and restructuring the game to eliminate the unnecessary time limit and Walking Dead scenarios, where your character doesn't have the requisite item to proceed further and there's no way to go back and get it, an all too common issue with these old adventures. There are also some new ambient sounds included, many of which I didn't particularly care for. But perhaps the biggest change is the removal of the text parser in favor of clickable action icons, giving the game a much smoother and modernized feel. I love King's Quest IV and recommend either version of it, but newer players will almost certainly find this version far more accessible. AGDI Interactive's fourth free Sierra remake and third King's Quest title is quite the doozy. It isn't a straight remake, but rather a continuation of the story from their King's Quest II remake, which we'll get to momentarily. Most of the original King's Quest III story is present, while the story they crafted in King's Quest II is interwoven throughout. While not quite as big and ambitious as the second was, this is still a very impressive game. The timer issue is tackled by giving it a color code, with green meaning you're in the clear, yellow meaning wrap up whatever you're doing, and red meaning get your crap shoved under the bed now. Spellcasting is a little clunky yet, but still vastly improved over the original. What really impressed me though was how they ripped out much of the third act and replaced it with an alternate story involving buried pirate treasure. This fills out the third act far better than the original, while fleshing out the pirate characters more. However, the puzzles in this section aren't great. But overall, I really enjoyed the direction AGDI took with this.
Indeed. Now get to work.
Wow, what a difference a little time and experience makes. While the original King's Quest II lacked a strong identity and direction, AGDI's remake crafts a sumptuous new version of Kalima filled with new and fleshed out characters, an expanded world filled with gorgeous artwork, both new and retooled puzzles, vastly improved voice acting and recording quality.
We understand that our daughter will never be joining us now.
And an expansive plot that features several interesting and interwoven character arcs that didn't exist before, including the monks, the vampire, Grandma, Little Red Riding Hood, King Triton, Valanice, Hagatha, the Enchanter, and even the thieving little dwarf.
Yes!
How kind of you to recognize me.
Wowzers! The fact that tremendous care was taken to expand the world and lore of King's Quest II without destroying its identity is evident from start to finish. While I certainly have no authority to canonize titles in any official capacity, as far as I'm personally concerned, this is the true, authoritative version of the game.
Trust me.
Developed by Phoenix Online Studios, The Silver Lining is a game that was nearly strangled in the cradle. Production began clear back in 2000, but was halted 2 major times by cease and desist letters from Sierra's new owners, Vivendi Games, and then again by Vivendi's new owners, Activision. After this and other smaller setbacks, the game was finally rescued from oblivion by a massive letter writing campaign from fans and the tireless efforts of the development team. They were allowed to keep all of the game's assets as long as they agreed to remove the King's Quest moniker from the title and Activision gaining ownership of the rights. Whew, that was a close one. But this series of events, despite being undoubtedly frustrating, was the forge that produced the finest unofficial release ever made. Although it was never finished, the 4 episodes that do exist weave a tapestry of intrigue, courage, love, and loss like no other has. Graham, now a senior content to watch his children get married and live a quiet life as a king, must once again don the old adventuring cap and scour the land of the Green Isles in search of a cure for the sleeping curse that afflicts his children. This quest takes him to locations both familiar and new while interacting with a large cast of characters, many of whom you will recognize from King's Quest VI and other sequels, with each being written into the plot in a way that feels organic and believable. Even though the graphics were a bit dated by the time the game was released, thanks to years of development hell, I never really noticed. I thought the game looked great and really nailed the lush backdrops that I enjoyed exploring as a teenager. That's not to say that everything is perfect. I would have preferred seeing a story where each major character was playable, perhaps with each character having their own chapter that contributes to the overall narrative. There's a couple of puzzles that were a bit much for me. I'm looking at you, candle lighting ceremony. I'm not going to name names, but one particular voice actor's performances were, unique, to put it politely. Navigating the beast's hedgerow maze will break the will of lesser players. And, well, whatever this is. Joking aside, the world of the Green Isles and the lore of King's Quest as a whole are expanded upon in the most loving and respectful way that a development team could possibly endeavor to. For this reason, it is a real shame that the series was never completed, with Episode 5 being stuck in a state of limbo for the last decade. While I don't think it's technically cancelled, it doesn't appear likely that we'll ever see a conclusion to the story. I genuinely hope I'm wrong. With the large catalog of adventure titles that have been released in the last dozen years, mostly by indie developers, and the unending tide of new titles incoming, including by some of my old favorites, it may be soon time to re-examine whether or not we are living in a silver age of adventure gaming. Perhaps we are now living in the new golden age, with a bright future ahead of us. If you know any of the old pioneers who helped keep the dream alive during the Dark Ages, oftentimes for free and on their own time, drop them a line. Tell them thanks.